What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Fantasy Insiders Halftime Show. We are the Fantasy Insiders Waiver Show here for Week 8. Hope you've had a good Week 8. I'm your host, Jeff Johnson. You can find me on the SiriusXM radio show every Monday through Friday from 12 to 2 a.m. Eastern Time with several co-hosts. One of those with us here tonight, Ben Gretch, Editor-in-Chief of the Fantasy Insiders. Ben, welcome to the show.
How we doing?
We're doing good. Also with me tonight, Josh ADHD. You can find him writing all sorts of good content for us at Fantasy Insiders. Josh, is it good?
Things are pretty good, Jeff. Pretty good.
It's been a busy Week 8. We just hit halftime here in the New Orleans Saints-Minnesota Vikings game. It's 17-13 New Orleans on top of the Vikings. Alvin Kamara with 2 touchdowns on the night tonight. So Alvin Kamara, for those of you who are starting to jump ship on him, as a lockdown top 5 type of player, maybe you overreacted just a bit. Guys, it was a super busy week this week. Lots of points being scored. Let's start with you, Ben. What was your main takeaway today?
Well, I'm looking at the Raiders now. We knew there would be some turnover there in terms of where their touches would go. Martavis Bryant not playing at all was really shocking. He in Week 6, before their Week 7 bye, Amari Cooper's last game for Oakland, he was concussed, and Bryant stepped up and ran a route on 80% of Derek Carr's dropbacks. He couldn't have been anywhere near that today. I don't even know if he ran more than a handful of routes all game. Brandon LaFell filled the old Amari Cooper role. We also saw Doug Martin run pretty decently, and Jalen Richard would be very involved in the passing game as he has been. So the Oakland offense, there's a lot of available opportunity there. Not a great offense necessarily, but they did put up 28 points today. It does look like Martavis Bryant, for whatever reason, is not going to be very involved. I don't know if I'm super interested in Brandon LaFell or Seth Roberts. Both of them scored today, though.
Josh, what do you think? Why is Martavis not being involved in that offense? Is it because he's not very good?
I think it's because the offense is too complex for him. And they made some mention of that early in the season, that he wasn't playing because he couldn't learn the playbook. He wasn't getting it. And it seems like that's just still the problem. That would be my guess.
That's bad news because that guy is so talented. I fell in love with him last year. Everybody's making fun of me because I took him in the 3rd round. I thought, Martavis Bryant coming back from suspension, he has all the upside in the world in Pittsburgh, and he's flamed out less than a year later. I think the big takeaway for me today was the hopes that David Johnson was going to reemerge as a top 3 running back. I think the jury is still out. Let's start with you, Josh. I mean, he was getting work out of the backfield as a receiver. His first 3 carries were right up the gut like we saw the first 6 weeks of the season. Hey, what do you make of David Johnson?
Well, the problem with David Johnson for the rest of the season is going to be that the offense is already installed. So it doesn't matter what the play caller does, I think, in a lot of cases, because the offense is there. They can't change all the plays in the playbook. So McCoy's gone, but all the pages are still there, and they still have to run the majority of those plays. And
yeah, but are all the pages runs right up the middle?
Well, I mean, apparently.
How many pages? How many pages is the playbook? It's just one.
Like, I get that, but they got a call on 1st and 10, a swing pass to him. Like, just not even like a screen necessarily, but just swing him out where he's the first read, run the receivers down the field. They did that last week on a play, easy like 8 to 9 yard gain on 1st down. It's not going to work every single time, but try different things like that. Mix it up. They talk, the analytics guys out there talk a lot about, obviously, running on 1st down is not necessarily the greatest option. But throwing to running backs on 1st down is a really good option. And for a team that has a David Johnson, they should be doing so much more passing to him on 1st down. You don't have to throw down the field on 1st down if you want to stay on a good down and distance, but that's when they should be throwing to him. 1st and 10, setting up ways to get him into space. And yeah, I was kind of appalled that they only threw to him 4 times today. I can't believe it. Caught all 4 of them, 41 yards. I don't know.
I mean, let's face it. I mean, David Johnson's obviously not going to be on the waiver wire, but as far as developments go, like, that's what I was looking at today. As a David Johnson owner, somebody was touting him as the number 1 pick overall this year. That was like the very first thing on my mind when I woke up this morning. Is it's like Christmas morning, and I'm expecting to open up the David Johnson playbook and see it's not just rushes right up the center's backside. Didn't really happen so much today. And Byron Leftwich was talking him up all week as well as somebody who was going to start seeing a Bruce Arians type workload and playbook going forward. So still yet to be seen on that one. As far as As far as big performers this week that we think might be waiver wire ads, let's get right into that. Jameis Winston, 4 interceptions today in just a debacle against the Cincinnati Bengals. Of course, Ryan Fitzpatrick comes in, and we see the Ryan Fitz magic that was there for his first 3 weeks of the season. Ben, is Ryan Fitzpatrick, do you think, going to be the starter at least next week? And by the way, next week the Bengals are off, the Colts are off, the Giants are out, Eagles, Cardinals, Jags, all with a bye week next week. So it's a big bye week with some talented quarterbacks that aren't going to be on the field.
I don't know if he will. I think he should probably take back over. Jameis Winston, I think, has thrown multiple interceptions in every game. He threw 4 today. Hasn't looked like he can protect the football. Not that Fitzpatrick is the most careful with the football either, but their offense just looks like it has a lot more spark right now with Ryan Fitzpatrick at quarterback. Who knows what will happen? If he does take over, I think he's streamable for sure. This is an offense in 2017 that led the NFL in air yards. This year, that's all we've seen. Scott Barrett at Pro Football Focus has had a good stat where if you combine Winston and Fitzpatrick's numbers, it's actually been more production than Patrick Mahomes. It'd be the quarterback one. And I think he said today that after today's game, that it would actually be the most passing yards in NFL history through the first 8 games. So this is an offense because they push the ball downfield so much. They have so much air yards in their offense, and because their defense can concede so many points, they're always chasing. They're going to throw. Fitzpatrick absolutely has to be fantasy viable if he's starting.
Josh, let's just assume he's starting. It's a matchup away at the Panthers next week in week 9 for Ryan Fitzpatrick. I mean, Mike Evans looked great as with Ryan Fitzpatrick as this quarterback. Is Ryan Fitzpatrick going to be somebody you want to stream next week, or would you be looking elsewhere on the waiver wire?
If I know that he's starting, I'm going to play him. I will play the Buccaneers quarterback regardless of who it is, unless it's, they trade for Mike Glennon and start him for some reason. It's the offense, man. That Monken scheme is working, and it doesn't matter who's throwing the ball right now. And I would say this, I don't often advocate for rostering 2 quarterbacks, but in this situation, if you have Winston, I would almost advocate for using an end of the bench spot on Fitzpatrick and just play rotation with those guys as Tampa Bay plays rotation with them.
Ben, do you see that as like a 10-12 team play or more of a 14 team play? Because a lot of these guys in 10 or 12 team leagues that are watching right now, there's so much talent on the waiver wire. It might not make much sense to have 2 quarterbacks on the roster for them.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that. I mean, I wouldn't want to waste a roster spot personally, but if we do get word that he's going to start, and last time what Dirk Cutter did was he didn't announce it, right? He said that he was not going to name who the starter was, and then as we approached game day, it kind of became clear that it was probably going to be Fitzpatrick. That was when Jameis first came back from a suspension. So who knows if we'll have any idea if Fitzpatrick will actually even be the starter. I just think if he's still sitting out there in your free agent pool, maybe come Sunday, he's worth considering for streaming if your alternatives are thin.
Jameis has looked so bad. 4 interceptions today. I think 2 of those were just inexcusable interceptions. Actually, I'll go with 3 of them. 2 of them were overthrown, one to Mike Evans, who was in the end zone. I think his second interception on the day, Jameis Winston just threw it directly to the defender 5 yards in front of him, and it was returned for a score. So whatever the case is, Jameis Winston's not getting it done. Speaking of not getting it done, when Jay Ajayi went out for the Eagles, we thought it was going to be a running back by committee. It was a running back by committee today, but Josh Adams received most of the work. 9 carries, 61 yards. He had the most carries on the Eagles. This, in theory, was a bad matchup from a running perspective because the Jags are supposed to be good defensively. Josh, is Josh Adams an ad in the waiver wires this week?
I think you have to tread lightly with the Philadelphia Eagles because just because he got the most carries this week doesn't mean anything. And Doug Peterson has shown us this each year that he's been there, is that the running back doesn't matter, and he will use these guys situationally, and you can't rely on any of these guys to get reliable work every week.
Not Josh. Ben, I'm looking at Ben. I actually said Josh. Ben, what's your take on Josh Adams? Because I think Josh Adams looked pretty good today. Corey Clement hasn't actually been effective the last 2 weeks when he's been getting the carries. And how do you break down that backfield?
No, I agree with Josh. I mean, I think good day today, but it was mostly all efficiency, 1 target. Clement also got a target. Smallwood had 3 and had a 36-yard touchdown reception, and actually had the most fantasy points out of the backfield. And that's just kind of how it goes. Like, even as Adams had a productive day rushing, or what you could consider a productive day, got the lead carry share with 9, and he ran for 6.8 yards a carry. All he had was, 61 rushing yards and 1 catch. I mean, he had about 7 to 8 PPR points. So not really worth it for me. I don't really see a scenario where he's going to be startable and worth worrying about, especially with Darren Sproles coming back pretty quick.
So let's go to the Raiders. Amari Cooper traded to the Cowboys, and we thought this offense was going to be a disaster. Well, 28 points today. I know they're playing against the Indianapolis Colts, but no Marshawn Lynch, Amari Cooper out of the lineup. There's question marks about who was going to be the lead dog at the running back position. Doug Martin with 13 carries and 72 yards. Jalen Richard, which I thought was going to be his primary role as a pass catcher, 8 receptions with 50 yards today. Are either of these, both of these guys, none of these guys, somebody you want to be adding in week 9, Josh?
Yeah, I think Richard's the guy you want to have in PPR leagues for sure. The target volume is going to be there. It's been there all season. He's when they're behind, they throw him the ball plenty. I think he's even being mixed in now when they're in neutral game script. So to me, I'd rather have him, because with Doug Martin, you're relying on a touchdown, and they've shown they're not scoring many rushing touchdowns. They're not scoring many touchdowns at all. So I think you got to go with Richard.
Ben, do you think Doug Martin has any value, though? Because we're in week 9, right? Most of the injuries that have happened, we have an established backup who is now taking on that number 1 duty. Doug Martin could be like a free square if he's going to be getting 15 carries a game.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I would want to see the efficiency for more than 1 week to trust it with Doug Martin. I mean, he looked good today, but we haven't seen that for a few years. It is the third year. If you go back in Doug Martin's career, he has like 2 really good seasons, and they're each 3 years apart, and we're back on that 3-year cycle right now. So maybe it's the Doug Martin equinox, if you will. I don't think I'm buying into it, but and I agree with Josh that Jalen Richard's the one I'd rather have. But I can see Doug Martin being a bye week fill-in in a couple weeks if he continues to look as spry and as efficient as he looked today. He did get 13 carries. He did also have 2 receptions, so that's a positive. But Richard, 8 catches on 8 targets. He's the PPR guy that these, the Raiders are going to continue to chase in games. They're going to need to throw, and Richard's going to rack up catches.
Aaron Jones looked great today for the Packers. 12 carries, 86 yards. Is he on waiver wires? I don't think I'm in a single league where he's available. Granted, I'm not in a league that's less than 12 players. If he's available, you have to add him, right?
Yeah. He should be owned.
Jamal Williams only 4 carries. So Aaron Jones tripled his carries today. Do you guys think that this is finally the week where Mike McCarthy realizes that Aaron Jones is the number 1 back, and going forward, Aaron Jones is going to be the primary ball carrier? Josh, we'll go with you.
Nope, I don't think so. I think McCarthy's going to continue to jerk these guys around because he's done it so far. He hasn't shown any capacity to change the entire time he's coached the Packers. Well,
I'll disagree a little bit, because I think they came out of a bye and we saw a 12 carry game for Jones, only 4 for Jamal Williams, 2 for Ty Montgomery. I think maybe they've turned the corner here.
Well, let's look at the receiving group there, because I agree. Like, Aaron Jones, he's obviously the most talented guy. If he's tripling the carries there in Green Bay, certainly that would be indicative of some sort of pattern going forward. So I'm hopeful as an Aaron Jones owner that is at least going to be getting double-digit touches every week. But what really confuses me going forward with the Packers is how you divvy up the receptions for the wide receiving core, because Randall Cobb was healthy today. Devontae Adams is just going to continue being Devontae Adams. But you have MVS, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and Equanimeous St. Brown, who's looked good as well. Now, St. Brown only had 2 targets. Valdez-Scantling had 5 today. Is that just going to be such a convoluted situation that the second, third, and fourth receivers aren't necessarily going to be worthwhile in fantasy?
Looks like it's headed that way. I mean, it was nice to see that the rookies who've been productive continue to be involved today. And that's definitely going to hurt Allison and Cobb. I think Devontae Adams will still be the number 1. My expectation kind of going forward is he'll still be the number 1, and then you're going to have just a logjam for targets behind that if MVS and ESB are both going to be involved.
What do you do with Geronimo Allison, Josh? Were you high on Geronimo Allison coming into the season? I thought he was going to be the number 2 receiver in Green Bay.
When I thought he was going to be the number 2, I was high on him. But now that he has apparently been displaced by Valdez-Scantling, I think we have to weigh that very heavily. We saw how Aaron Rodgers reacted to Valdez-Scantling on the touchdown today. I mean, he was hyped. So I think that will speak probably some volume toward who's going to play going forward, because that's who Rodgers will want out there. And I think we kind of need to move that way.
So one of my picks as the flex play of the week was David Moore for the Seattle Seahawks. He had a big game today, guys. Touchdown. Russell Wilson was targeting him deep as well. Ben, is he somebody you want to be adding?
Yeah, I mean, he's playing a solid amount as their number 2. His like routes as a percentage of dropbacks peaked a couple weeks ago. They dropped back down a little bit the week before the bye, but they came back out of the bye this week and certainly used him significantly. So he's a spark score guy. Has an underrated breakout age and dominator rating as a prospect as well. Looks like he could be like an underrated steal of this like dynasty class for dynasty owners. But if you're in a redraft league as well, I mean, he's definitely somebody to target.
Okay, I'm going to name 3 or 4 wide receivers. You guys rank these for me. David Moore, DJ Moore, who had a good game today, continues to see more play there in Carolina, Courtland Sutton, or Devontae Parker. David Moore, DJ Moore, Courtland Sutton, Devontae Parker.
I'll go DJ Moore, Courtland Sutton, Devontae Parker, David Moore. I think David Moore's more of a deep league guy. I don't know if I'm really buying into Devontae Parker yet, which is why I still have him behind. Really excited for DJ Moore. I know Torrey Smith was out today, but he led the team in targets, receptions, yards. He also had 2 carries for 39 yards. I just don't see how they can keep playing him as a part-time player. I think he's, other than Christian McCaffrey, their best offensive player right now. So I would expect him to continue to grow into a role. And Courtland Sutton, if Demaryius Thomas gets traded, looks like he is just absolutely ready to play at the NFL level in his rookie season as well.
So you didn't mention Devontae Parker.
Yeah, I'd have him 3rd. I'm just not as excited about him. Had a good game this week. Been burned by him a few too many times. He's had some big games in the past. He's just never really been consistent, whether it's desire, conditioning, what have you. It's just something that hasn't stayed consistent, and I'd want to see that before I really buy into it. I'd rather bet on these 2 rookies that I think can definitely play and have upside.
Josh, we mentioned Courtland Sutton there. Let's say Demaryius Thomas is traded. Where would you value Courtland Sutton going forward, and how much fab would you spend on that guy?
If I know that he's going to be wide receiver 2 in Denver, I'm probably going to drop 50% of my fab on him. I think it's hard to find a receiver that's going to get that type of volume that can beast like that kid can beast. I mean, he made that 42-yard grab today look easy, and he's done that all season. So if he steps into 8 to 10 targets a week, that's a league winner.
What I don't understand is why coaches, they see somebody like Courtland Sutton doing what he's doing every single week, and it seems like Keenum is at least targeting him in the end zone. Like, why don't these players carve out a bigger chunk of the playbook? Because DJ Moore was the same way. Like, it seems like the only coach who's not doing that is Pete Carroll, and he's giving David Moore run every single week. Yet Courtland Sutton is stuck in this pattern of 3 or 4 targets. They're all quality targets, but it's
a lot of air yards.
What do they have to do to get more playing time?
I don't know. It's the old school NFL, right? They want their veterans to get their time.
I don't know. I would love to see Courtland Sutton get solid run in Denver, because he looks like he could be a breakout type wide receiver this year if they decided to give him, 7, 8 targets every single week. All right.
Absolutely. And I think the same thing is true of DJ Moore. I mean, he's been extremely efficient per target all year as well. And they continue to run Torrey Smith ahead of him. Jarius Wright is actually a pretty underrated receiver. He's been playing in the slot, but the Torrey Smith stuff, I just do not understand. DJ Moore should be out on the field. And the point you're making about Courtland Sutton, same thing. I mean, in Denver, I think you can make a case that because those 2 guys have been so productive for so long, they've kind of earned this, seniority, right? That they like, you can't just push Demaryius Thomas aside. But I still tend to agree. I think Cortland Sutton's a more explosive and better player than Demaryius Thomas right now. And I think the same is very much true of DJ Moore and Torrey Smith. That one's way more confounding to me because Torrey Smith was just like a low-cost free agent ad. He has no real long-term he hasn't been a member of the Panthers before this season. He wasn't any good for the Eagles last year. How that guy is playing over your first-round pick wide receiver who looks explosive, it baffles me.
I don't understand it either. And coaches talk about this pretty regularly as far as like the pattern or not a pattern necessarily, but this narrative for how they want a rookie to ingrain themselves in the offense. It just seems like to an extent, Cortland Sutton's getting stuck in a pattern there. Jack Doyle healthy for the first time in a while today, 6 receptions, 70 yards, and a touchdown. Eric Ebron had a touchdown himself. And heck, let's just let all of the tight ends score a touchdown for the Indianapolis Colts, because it was Mo Alley-Cox scoring the 3rd touchdown for Andrew Luck today in the Colts in a 42-28 win. Let's break it down among Jack Doyle and Eric Ebron, Josh. Which one of those guys do you want to have going forward? And even if let's say you pass on Eric Ebron, you still want him on your team?
I definitely want Doyle. I mean, Doyle's the tight end one. He's going to be the highest usage guy in that offense outside of T.Y. Hilton. Ebron, I think, is going to be streamer type material at this point. If Doyle is out again, Ebron's a starter. If Doyle's playing, then you're hoping for a touchdown from Ebron, because he's effectively like the wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 in the offense if Doyle's playing.
What about Ed Dickson, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, he looked all right today. He looked a little bit athletic. They definitely used him. They also threw to Nick Vannett in the end zone. I think it was called back because he stepped out of the back of the end zone or something to that effect. So I believe he caught a touchdown that was then taken back. And actually, that is what happened. Ed Dickson had a couple catches, one long one, and then another one for a touchdown. I do think they'll continue to use both of them, so it's going to be a little bit tough to tell. It looks like right away with Dickson making his return and immediately, having the two catches and the 54 yards and the TD and the biggest tight end game we've seen from a Seahawk since Will Disley was still healthy, that probably Dickson would be the one to own. But I don't know how much you can really trust him unless you're in kind of a deep league, and tight end's thin. Maybe a matchup play, but probably not someone that I would even have as like a mid-range tight end 2, probably more of a low-end tight end 2 at best.
I'm kind of excited about the Seahawks offense, strangely enough. It's really weird to even say that with how poorly I thought of them coming into the season. But Chris Carson looked great today. Tyler Lockett looks really good as a slot type of receiver. David Moore getting the targets. And, of course, Doug Baldwin, if he's continuing to get healthy. That's actually a very good offense. Let's get into injuries, though, guys. Josh Reynolds in the fantasy community, we love the name, hasn't done much so far. Today had a little mini breakout, 3 receptions for 42 yards and 2 touchdowns. Is he somebody you want to be adding, Josh?
Yeah, as long as Kupp is out, I think we have to add him now because it looked like he was playing the Kupp role today.
Yeah, and he has been. He's been playing big snaps, so I totally agree. I mean, I threw him in some DFS lineups today. It kind of bailed me out in the afternoon, actually.
Smart.
Yeah, it was pretty sweet, but good leverage play on Woods and Cooks today. And I wrote about that in my Roto Grinders article for the subscribers who checked that out. But as long as Kupp's out, he's going to play full time as a third receiver, and he's definitely somebody that you can stream and play.
So Tyreek Hill strained his groin today. Not exactly sure how long that's going to keep him out, but who would you want to be adding if Tyreek Hill is out?
I'm going to add Chris Conley. Chris Conley is a physical freak himself. He's not quite on Tyreek Hill's level. He's a lot bigger. He's 6'3", and he can fly down the field himself. So I think he steps into a big role if Tyreek Hill misses any time.
Ben, like Sammy Watkins had 2 touchdowns today. Finally looked like the old Sammy Watkins. Do you buy into the Chris Conley narrative? Because I don't really buy it. Like, I understand him. He's a physically gifted football player, but there's like so many other offensive options there. I tend to think that maybe instead of just featuring Chris Conley, they'll more heavily target the other offensive weapons.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think Conley could be productive in this like fourth role. Like say he could end up with like a 3-catch, 50-yard and a touchdown day because this is a high-powered offense. So not too dissimilar from what we just talked about with Josh Reynolds. The difference is I think the Rams tend to just spread the ball around a little bit more to whoever is open. In the Chiefs case, I think they do kind of tend to lean towards specific targets. I think we would see more targets go towards Travis Kelce, more balls go towards Sammy Watkins, and plenty of work for Kareem Hunt, obviously. So I think Conley would, and we've seen this from Conley throughout his career in Kansas City, I think he would just be kind of more of a blocker, running a lot of snaps, running a lot of routes, but not doing a lot in terms of fantasy production.
Will Fuller goes down for the season with a torn ACL on Thursday Night Football. If Keke Coutee is healthy, Josh, let's start with you. How would you break down that? I think there's 3 wide receivers that could realistically get a ton of volume. Keke Coutee, Tyler Ervin, or Vincent Smith. Any of them ownable?
I think Keke Coutee has to be owned, even if Fuller is healthy, hypothetically speaking, because as the third receiver, he was out targeting Fuller by a healthy margin. So now Fuller's out of the picture. They are still going to feature Coutee if he comes back. Behind him, Tyler Ervin ran a lot of routes on Thursday night as a slot receiver. I don't think they're really going to try to target him that much. He's kind of a puncher's chance of getting some points. So for me, it's Coutee, and then maybe one of the athletic tight ends they have as a home run swing option, either Jordan Thomas or Jordan Akins, but probably Jordan Thomas as just a deep look for Houston.
How much of your fab would you spend on Keke Coutee, Josh?
I would probably spend probably 25 to 30% at this point, because he's going to be he'll be a high.
I'd go even higher.
High volume offense, maybe 50%. I mean,
yeah,
you're kind of talking me that way too.
Ben is bidding you up right now, Josh.
Yeah.
55. I go 55%.
If he's available right now, Will Fuller's out for the year, and we saw Coutee come in and basically render Fuller make Fuller take a back seat in terms of targets. But we've seen this offense before be very heavily concentrated between Hopkins and Fuller, and then for a while there, it was mostly concentrated between Hopkins and Coutee, with Fuller still seeing targets. Now Fuller's gone; they don't have anyone else. Like you were just saying, I mean, it could be Tyler Ervin. He caught a touchdown. They got called back on Thursday night. You mentioned he was playing a ton. Jordan Thomas had a couple touchdowns. I don't know that he's necessarily going to be a consistent threat, or even Ryan Griffin when he comes back. So I think it's going to pretty much become Hopkins and Coutee, which Coutee could end up being a PPR stud this year.
Stud? Like, yeah. When you say stud, I think
this is a high-volume passing offense. I absolutely think he could end up being a 7 to 8 target per game guy without Will Fuller on the field. This offense was so heavily concentrated between Hopkins and Fuller. And I think this is like a situation where you have a guy who's going to be a clear number 2, and there's not really a viable number 3 in the passing game.
Yeah. He could be like Cooper Kupp. He could be like Jarvis Landry.
Maybe not as much touchdown equity as Cooper Kupp, but I think that's a good call. And Landry's a good idea as well. I mean, I think high reception, maybe not high yardage, but in PPR leagues, that's very viable. And you're not going to find those kind of guys on the waiver wire where you like. I think he could be like a wide receiver 3 the rest of the way.
Yeah, I mean, like another comp would be Julian Edelman. You know, he could be that type of player.
All right. Well, here's the deal. I would spend more than 50% of my fab on Julian Edelman, Cooper Kupp, whoever else you just named right there. I think we're in the Antonio Brown territory. We're heading that way. And if they're going to have that sort of upside, like I am all in. I'm moving all of my chips to the middle of the table on Keke Coutee. If he's going to be getting that much volume, screw 50%. We're in week 9 now. Like we're trying to make a claim. You have to go for it all on somebody like him, because there's not going to be somebody like that on the waiver wire most likely for the rest of the season.
Yeah, his upside's probably 80% of those players, but his production would be in the mold of those players, and I still think that's somebody worth going in after on the waiver wire, especially if you need receiver help in a PPR league. I mean, for sure.
Well, I'm interested to know your takes on this next guy. Josh, we'll start with you. No Bilal Powell. Trenton Cannon got quite a bit of buzz this week as maybe a PPR type of running back, but Elijah McGuire should be healthy starting next week. Is he somebody you want on your roster?
I think he's a guy that you want to add if you have any aspirations of winning your fantasy playoffs. He could be a league winner later this year. They likened him to LaDainian Tomlinson in New York before the season, before his injury. They thought enough of him to put him on short-term IR so they could bring him back. So I'm really high on that kid. Cannon's a good player himself. So I think McGuire's probably more of the 3-down back type player, and then Cannon's more of the scat back type. So I think long-term I'm looking at McGuire and really want to have him on my roster somewhere.
Do you think that Isaiah Crowell is going to cut in tremendously? Because Isaiah Crowell, outside of the 200-yard game, really hasn't done much this season at all.
Yeah, I could envision a scenario where McGuire displaces Crowell to some degree and renders Crowell more of a backup type, maybe like 8 to 10 carries a game, like what Powell was doing, and then McGuire getting the lion's share.
Interesting. I mean, I love the talent of Elijah McGuire. It seems like last year, whenever he was healthy and playing, he was doing something good for that offense. If you look at the schedule rest of season, it really does. It looks pretty good for Elijah McGuire. Away at the Dolphins, home against the Bills, Patriots, Titans, Bills again, Texans, Packers. So it's a good schedule for him coming up. All right, let's talk about QB streamers before we get out of here. We talked about Ryan Fitzpatrick earlier in the show. Ben, would you rather have Ryan Fitzpatrick next week if he's playing, or CJ Beathard at home against the Raiders?
Would I rather have the guy who will chuck the ball down the field over and over again, ruthlessly, even if he's thrown like 7 interceptions, and will make sure he gets yardage for my team? Or would I rather have the guy who dinks and dunks every single time?
You heard the question. You heard the question, Ben.
Everyone thinks CJ Beathard can push the ball down the field because we saw it on primetime. He hit Marquise Goodwin for a long touchdown. Coming into this week, that was the only pass he'd completed so far this year, more than 21 air yards. And I know it's a weird cutoff, but let's just phrase that differently. His second longest completed pass was 21 air yards. That long touchdown to Marquise Goodwin was a 42-yard air yard pass. I haven't watched or seen all the data from today, so maybe he completed some other passes down the field today. But we have a pretty long sample dating back to last year and like a 4-game sample this year that Beathard doesn't push the ball down the field. He's been really reliant over his few starts on George Kittle's yak. He has over 200 yards after the catch in Beathard's like 4 games, which is adding like 50 passing yards a game after the catch. And maybe Kittle can continue to do that, but I would much rather have a guy like Fitzpatrick where I know he's going to continue to push the ball down the field. If some of those are brought in, he's going to rack up some passing yards for your fantasy team.
All right, well, let me dial it back just a step then. Okay, fine. I think Ryan Fitzpatrick's a better play, but you have Andy Dalton on a bye next week, Andrew Luck on a bye, Carson Wentz on a bye. So there's several owners out there that are going to be needing a streaming option at QB. I mean, would you at least be looking at CJ Beathard next week? I think it's a pretty good matchup.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think you can argue he's worth looking at in leagues where, let's say Fitzpatrick doesn't start, or Fitzpatrick's, someone else grabs him off the waiver wire or whatever. And you're real desperate. I mean, I think you can look at him, certainly. He had a little bit of a connection with Kendrick Bourne today, who played in place of Pierre Garçon, who missed. I want to look at the numbers a little bit more. I don't like targeting quarterbacks that don't push the ball down the field. That is like, I mentioned the air yards a lot because that is pretty important to me. Guys that will actually at least push the ball down the field have a much better chance of racking up the chunk passing yards. Guys like Beathard are the ones that can give you 175, 200 passing yards. And if they don't throw the touchdowns, it's just not a good enough fantasy day. He's been all right a couple of weeks because he's thrown multiple passing touchdowns in a couple of his starts. But so, yeah, for me, I mean, he's like a low-end QB2 in this matchup.
Fair enough. He did have a 55-yard touchdown pass to Marquise Goodwin today. But,
yeah. Oh, right. Yeah, that was a slant pattern.
Dang it, I was hoping you weren't watching.
Yeah, so I have the data. Imagine that. I've got the data. He threw 1 pass over 20 air yards today.
I really
there you go.
Data.
And only 2 last week.
I will say this. I'm going to defend CJ Beathard to some degree. He doesn't throw the ball deep. Next week is his chance. Oakland applies the least amount of pressure in the NFL by a large margin. So he will have more time to throw next week than he will have.
He'll have more time to find the underneath receiver that he really wants to throw to.
This is true. This is true. But he will also have a chance to go deep. And I guarantee that they're going to take a couple of deep shots to Goodwin next week because he will have another tick to look downfield.
I was really hoping that Ben had not seen the 55-yard pass to Marquise Goodwin. that was the one thing I was going to use in the show. Damn it.
More
Keenum.
yards after the catch.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, it's useful. Marquise Goodwin could do that again next week.
I mean, that's why I said like he's like a low-end QB2. He's not an like non-startable player. In a good matchup, yeah, you could use him. If you don't have if you're in a league where there's not a lot of great streaming options. I'm in some leagues where guys are carrying 3 quarterbacks for some reason, some home leagues. And I streamed Eli Manning last week. In that type of a league, CJ Beathard is certainly viable. I mean, he's certainly worth consideration. I would caution that on his upside, you're relying on his playmakers to make plays for him, and he does have a couple, Goodwin and Kittle. So,
I would use him in my super flex spot next week. If you play in that type of league, he'd be good for that.
There you go. Case Keenum, before we wrap it up, Case Keenum at home against the Texans next week. I'm sure there's some sort of narrative there with Case Keenum and Houston. Josh, is he somebody you want to be playing next week?
I think he's dynamite play next week against Houston. I mean, they get him at home. We know Houston's going to put points up on this defense. I think Keenum's a great play next week.
Great. Make a call. 300 yards and a couple tutties.
It could be a couple of INTs mixed in with that, as he is wont to do. But I think he is probably like in the top, let's say, 18 quarterbacks for me next week. So if I need to, I'll start him. I don't have a problem with it.
All right. Well,
I'm not as optimistic, but I will say, is this game in Houston? Because he grew up there. He went to school there.
No, it's in Denver.
It's in Denver.
Went to school there, got a start in the NFL for the Houston Texans, but it is in Denver. There goes your narrative street. It's just not going to happen for him.
Yeah, but he's got to look up at the scoreboard and see HOU, and he's like,
nostalgia.
That's my people. It's my people. All right, we got to go. It's been a fun one tonight. Reminder, if you need any resources for your year-long fantasy needs, check us out on Fantasy Insiders. We have all the resources you need for a successful waiver wire in week number 9. Of course, data, usage rates, snaps, everything you could think of from a fantasy football perspective. Hop on and find us over at fantasyinsiders.com. On behalf of Josh ADHD, Ben Gretch, I'm Jeff Johnson. We'll see you next week for the Fantasy Insiders Waiver Wire Show.